He dated a quiet librarian for 3 months before she discovered he ran the company whose donation had just saved her library from closing. The morning it all started, Owen Charest was not supposed to be in Hartwell at all. His calendar had him in Toronto until Thursday. Back-to-back board reviews, a Q3 presentation, the usual machinery of a company that didn't pause for weather or sentiment. But the overnight train from Ottawa had developed mechanical trouble somewhere between Kingston and Belleville, and the Via Rail attendant had announced, with the apologetic calm of someone who'd delivered bad news many times before, that passengers would be offloaded at the next station and accommodated locally until morning. The next station was Hartwell, Ontario, population 14,000. 1 Main Street, 1 hotel fully booked for a regional curling tournament, and 1 public library that, according to the hand-painted sign on the door, offered free Wi-Fi in extended evening hours on Wednesdays. Owen had his laptop, a half-dead phone, and a presentation due in 18 hours. He pushed open the library door at 8:14 p.m. and stepped inside. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Old paper and cedar and something faintly like Earl Grey. The kind of smell that doesn't get manufactured, only accumulated over decades. The second thing he noticed was the woman behind the reference desk, who was carefully taping the spine of a children's book with the focused attention of someone performing surgery. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, she said, "We close at 9 on Wednesdays, but you look like someone who just got stranded by the train." He blinked. "Is it that obvious?" "The rolling carry-on and the expression," she said. "Also, the 640 comes through twice a week, and it's been breaking down since October. You're not the first." She nodded toward the reading tables near the window. "Wi-Fi password is on the board. There's an outlet behind the radiator, but you have to angle the plug slightly, or it loses connection." He thanked her. She returned to her book surgery. Her name, he learned from the small placard on the desk, was Josephine Marchand, Library Services Coordinator. She wore a gray cardigan over a flannel shirt and moved through the stacks the way people move through spaces they've been doing for years, without looking, without hesitation, like a person who'd grown into the architecture. Owen sat up at the table, near the window, found the outlet, angled the plug exactly as instructed. It held. He worked. Around 8:45 she came by quietly to set a small paper cup of tea on the table beside him. Not close enough to interrupt, just within reach. "Chamomile," she said. "It's left over from the afternoon program. You don't have to drink it." He did drink it. At 9 o'clock she turned the overhead lights to half and said the building was technically closed. But she still had cataloging to finish, and he was welcome to stay until she locked up, if he needed. He stayed until 10 past 10. When he finally packed up, he thanked her properly, by which he meant he actually stopped, turned, and said it like he meant it, which apparently surprised her slightly. "Good luck with whatever's in that bag," she said. "Quarterly earnings," he said. "Worse," she said, and went back to her cataloging. He stood on the sidewalk in the November cold and realized he was smiling at nothing in particular. He couldn't remember the last time that had happened on a Wednesday. He found a room above a pub 2 blocks over, finished his presentation by midnight and delivered it by video call at 7 the next morning from a chair angled toward the window, so the board couldn't see the moose figurines on the shelf behind him. The numbers were good. They always were. No one asked where he was calling from. He took the 11:15 train back to Toronto and thought once about the angled plug and the paper cup of camel, and then thought about the Rideau acquisition that needed his attention by Friday. He did not think about Hartwell again for 11 days, and then he went back. He told himself it was because the firm had a regional education file that needed a site visit in the area, which was true, technically. He told himself Hartwell was simply convenient, which was also technically true. He did not tell himself anything about the library or the woman who taped spines with the concentration of a watchmaker, because there was nothing to tell, really. He'd had a cup of chamomile and used an outlet. Josephine Marchand was at the reference desk when he walked in at 11 on a Thursday morning. She looked up from her monitor, registered him, and said, "The 640 runs Mondays and Wednesdays." "I know," he said. "I'm here on purpose this time." She considered that. "Okay," she said, and went back to her monitor. He spent 2 hours at the table by the window. He did actual work. Occasionally he was aware of her moving through the stacks, or speaking quietly with a patron, or laughing once at something a small child said near the picture books. The laugh was short and genuine, and sounded like someone who didn't perform warmth, just had it. When he was leaving, he stopped at the desk. "Is there a good place for lunch near here?" "Tremblay-on-Cedar does a decent bowl of soup aux pois," she said, still looking at her screen. "Tell them Josie sent you, or they'll seat you near the kitchen." He ate soup aux pois near the window. He came back the following Thursday, and the one after that. It became a thing that neither of them named. He'd arrive around 10 or 11, settle at the same table, work for 2 or 3 hours. She'd bring tea if she happened to be making some, or not if she wasn't, and he never asked either way. They talked in the manner of two people who've decided to be honest but not yet decided how much, carefully and with pauses they both seemed to find comfortable. He learned things about her the way you learn things when no one is trying to impress anyone. She'd grown up in Hartwell, left for university in Montreal, come back 7 years ago when her mother's health declined. She had a sister in Vancouver who called every Sunday and a cat named after a 19th century cartographer. She read in French and English with equal ease and had opinions about both that she delivered without apology. She learned things about him too, that he took his coffee black, that he worked too much and knew it, that he'd grown up in Quebec City, moved to Toronto for his MBA, and had not in 15 years learned to properly love Toronto winters, only endure them. He told her he worked in private equity and education investment, and hated how that sounded even as he said it. "It sounds like something people say at parties when they don't want to talk about what they actually do," she said. "That's exactly what it is," he said. She didn't press. He was quietly grateful. What he did not tell her was that the fund he ran, Cherished Capital Partners, with $340 million under management and a specific mandate around educational infrastructure, was currently reviewing a grant file for the Hartwell Public Library System. That the file had been on his desk since September. That the library's operating budget had been cut twice in 3 years by the municipality, and that without external funding, 2 of its 3 branches would reduce to 3 days a week by spring. He hadn't connected the 2 things at first. Or, rather he had, and had immediately quarantined the information in a separate part of his mind where he kept things that were complicated. The grant file was handled by his associate, Bridget Okafor, and Owen had recused himself from the final decision the moment he realized where things were heading. He'd told Bridget only that he had a conflict, and she should run it up to the board without his input. He told himself that was the right thing to do. It was. What he didn't tell Josephine was any of it. He kept coming back to Hartwell on Thursdays. December came in cold and quiet. One afternoon, Owen arrived to find the library unusually busy. A long table set up near the back with folding chairs and a banner that read, in both official languages, Winter Reading Challenge. Week 3. A volunteer was helping a boy with his reading log. A woman with a baby on her hip was browsing the new releases. 2 elderly men played chess in the corner with the particular silence of people who've been doing it for years. Owen watched Josephine move through it all, answering a question here, helping someone with a printer there, crouching down to find a specific book for a child who knew only that it had a blue cover and a dog on it. She found it in 4 minutes. The child carried it away like treasure. Later, after the reading program had wound down and the building had quieted, Owen stayed later than usual. He was helping her stack the folding chairs. She hadn't asked, he'd simply started doing it, and she said, without looking at him, "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. They stacked the chairs together. Walking to his car in the dark, Owen Cherished realized something he'd been not realizing for several weeks. He was not coming to Hartwell for the Wi-Fi or the regional education file or the soup aux pois. He was coming because of the way Josephine Marchand noticed things that other people walked past, and the way she could be in a room without needing to fill it, and the way she had laughed that first night at something a child said near the picture books. He drove back to Toronto with the radio off and did not call any of the 3 people who'd left messages that afternoon. On the 2nd Thursday of January, the temperature dropped to -22, and Owen's car heater made a sound it had never made before and then stopped making sounds entirely. He sat in a parking lot 2 blocks from the library and called roadside assistance and was told the wait was 90 minutes. He texted Josephine, "Stuck in the lot on Cedar car. Don't ask." 3 minutes later she appeared at his window wearing her parka and a wool hat pulled down to her eyebrows, carrying 2 thermoses. "I didn't ask," she said when he rolled the window down. He climbed out. They walked back to the library and she unlocked the door and turned on the back lights only, and they sat at the table by the window with the thermoses between them. Outside, the street was empty and pale blue with cold. She poured. He didn't know what it was, something hot and slightly spiced, maybe apple and ginger. But he held the cup with both hands and was grateful in a way he hadn't been in a long time for something so small. "You've been coming here for 2 months," she said. "About that, you don't have to be honest if it's complicated," she said. "But I'd prefer it." He looked at her. She was watching him with the same steady attention she gave the books she repaired. Not impatient, not performing patience either. Just present. "I came back the second time because of you," he said. "The rest of it has been because of you. I'm sorry I haven't said it more plainly." The window fogged slightly at the edges from the difference in temperature. Neither of them moved. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay? I'm just noting that you said it," she said. "I haven't decided what to do with it yet." He nodded. He could respect that. He did respect that. His car was ready at 8:45. When he left, Josephine walked him to the door and said, "Same time next Thursday?" "Yes," he said. She closed the door. He stood in the cold a moment, and then walked to the parking lot and drove home, and for the first time in a long while, he went to sleep before midnight. February arrived with freezing rain that coated everything in a thin shell of ice and made Hartwell look like a town preserved in glass. Owen was reading at the table by the window, the library quiet around him, when he heard Josephine's voice from the back office go abruptly still. He wasn't listening. Then he was, because the silence was the kind that has weight. She came out, a few minutes later. Her face was composed, but her hands were doing the thing they did when something was wrong, rearranging items on the desk that didn't need rearranging. "Everything okay?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment, which was how he knew it wasn't. "The municipality confirmed the spring budget cuts this morning," she said. "2 branches to reduced hours. We've been waiting on one external grant that might have covered it. Apparently it's been delayed, possibly declined. We'll know by March." She said it evenly, the way people say hard things they've been preparing to say for a while. Owen looked down at his laptop. His reflection looked back at him. The grant. Bridget's file. The decision that had gone to the board without his input, because he'd recused himself the moment he'd understood the conflict. He had not checked the outcome. He realized now, sitting at the table by the window with Josephine's hands rearranging her desk, that he had specifically not checked the outcome, in the way you sometimes don't check on things you're afraid to know. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's a hard weight." She nodded. "It is what it is. Libraries are used to fighting for the table." She said it without bitterness, which made it harder to hear, not easier. That evening, driving back to Toronto, Owen called Bridget. "The Hartwell Library file," he said. "Where did it land?" A brief pause. "Approved," Bridget said. "Board passed it 3 weeks ago. Full amount, 3-year term. I thought you knew. I recused. I didn't follow up. The letters went out last week. They should have it by now." He drove the rest of the way home in silence, thinking about Josephine's hands rearranging things that didn't need rearranging, about the reduced hours, about a woman who'd given a stranger chamomile tea and an angled plug and had been quietly holding up a building for years and hadn't known the answer was already on its way. He also thought about the fact that she didn't know, that she had been sitting across from him for 2 months, telling him about budget cuts and patron numbers and the cost of replacing the roof on the Cedar Street branch, and he had listened and said nothing and offered nothing, except the company of someone who knew things he wasn't saying. He didn't feel good about that. He pulled off at a rest stop north of Barrie and sat with the engine idling for a few minutes. He thought about the original video interview he'd done for a national education funding magazine in November, the one that had run just before he'd first arrived in Hartwell. He thought about how many people in 14,000 people might have seen it. He thought about Josephine, who read everything in 2 languages, who subscribed to 3 periodicals, and probably knew more about the Canadian education funding landscape than most of his associates. He drove the rest of the way thinking about time. The letter arrived at the library on a Tuesday. Owen knew because Josephine called him, which she hadn't done before, always texting. When he picked up, he could hear in her voice the specific quality of someone trying not to cry, or trying to decide if they're allowed to. "We got it," she said. "The full amount, 3-year term, both branches, a breath. I've been here for 7 years fighting for this building, and I just needed to tell someone. I'm glad," Owen said. And then, carefully, "You should celebrate." "I made tea," she said. He could hear the smile in it. He didn't say anything about what he knew. He thought, Thursday. He would tell her Thursday. He would sit down across from her and say it plainly and let her decide what to do with it. the same way she'd done with everything else. But Thursday came and went, and he didn't say it. Because when he arrived, she was in the middle of planning a celebration, event for the grant, and her face had a kind of light in it he hadn't seen before, and he could not make himself interrupt it with the conversation that needed to happen. He told himself one more week. He told himself he would find the right moment. He kept not finding it. In the third week of March, Josephine showed him a feature article in a regional education journal. She'd printed it out, which was how he knew she thought it was important. "This foundation cherished capital partners," she said, tapping the page. "They're doing the same kind of grant work in 4 other regions. Small libraries, small schools, rural communities. I want to write them a thank you letter." She paused. "An actual letter, not an email. I think they deserve an actual letter." Owen looked at the page. His own name was in the second paragraph. He looked at Josephine. "That's a good idea," he said. He drove home that evening and sat at his kitchen table for a long time. He thought about the woman he'd lived with for 4 years, who'd left 6 months after the fund had its first difficult quarter. Not because of the difficulty, she'd been honest enough to say, but because she'd realized she'd been in love with a version of him that only existed when things were going well, and she couldn't be certain she'd ever really seen the other version at all. He thought about how much of himself he'd withheld since then, not out of strategy, but out of a tired kind of self-protection that had become indistinguishable from habit. He thought about Josephine writing an actual letter, with a pen, to his office. To him without knowing it was him. He took out a piece of paper. He was a better writer than most people knew, because he rarely wrote anything that wasn't a prospectus or a term sheet. But he had grown up in a house where his mother wrote letters to her own mother every week, by hand, in the particular cursive of Quebecois women of a certain generation, and something of that had stayed in him. He wrote for an hour. He crossed things out. He started again. When he was done, he read it back once, changed 2 words, and folded it. He drove to Hartwell the next morning, before the library opened. He left the letter in the book drop with her name on the outside. Then he went and had soup aux pois at Tremblay's and waited. The letter said, "Josephine, I've rewritten this more times than I can count. I'm going to stop rewriting and just tell you. The fund that approved your library's grant is mine. Cherished Capital Partners is my firm. I am the Owen Cherished in the second paragraph of that article. I recused myself from the final decision the moment I understood the conflict. The board approved it without my involvement, and I didn't follow up on the outcome because I was afraid of what it might mean for the thing between us that I didn't have a name for yet. That was cowardly. I should have told you months ago, and I didn't. And I've been watching you not know and telling myself I was waiting for the right moment, and the truth is I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew, you'd wonder if any of it was real, or whether the grant and the visits and the thermoses in the parking lot were all somehow connected, and that the wondering would undo what we'd built. It isn't connected. Or rather, it is, but not the way you might fear. I didn't come back to Hartwell because of the library file. I came back because of you. The library was a coincidence that became a complication that became something I should have handled better. I know what it's like to have someone withhold the truth from you and call it protection. My ex-partner did that to me for 2 years before she left, and it was the withholding that hurt more than the leaving. I swore I wouldn't do that to anyone. And then I did it anyway, which tells you something about how difficult I found thought of losing what we had. The grant stands regardless of anything. It is not contingent on you forgiving me or speaking to me again. It was approved by a board, and it belongs to the library, and it belongs to you, and to Hartwell, and to the boy who needed a book with a blue cover and a dog on it. If you decide you don't want to see me again, I will understand it. If you decide you want to shout at me first, I'll be at Tremblay's until noon." Owen he was on his second cup of coffee when she walked through the door at 11:23. She sat down across from him. She set the letter on the table between them, folded exactly as he'd left it. She'd been crying, he could see, but she wasn't now. Her hands were still. He didn't speak. He'd said what he needed to say. "You recused yourself," she said finally. "Yes, before or after you started coming on Thursdays. Before. The week I found out the file was Hartwell's, I removed myself from it completely." She nodded slowly. "The board approved it. Unanimously. I checked after you called me." She looked out the window. A woman walked past with a stroller, leaning into the wind. The ice had finally gone from the streets, and the maple trees along Cedar were showing the first pale suggestion of buds. What I keep coming back to," she said carefully, "is that you let me sit there and tell you about the cuts and the weight, and you didn't say anything. I know. That was wrong." "Yes," he said. "It was." She looked at him. Not angry exactly, more like someone reading a document carefully before deciding whether to sign it. "Why didn't you just tell me from the start what you did for work?" she said. When I asked the first time, he thought about how to answer that honestly. "I've spent 10 years having conversations that changed the moment people knew. Not always badly, sometimes they get more interested, which is its own problem. I wanted to know what it was like to be in a room with someone who was just talking to me." He paused. "I know that's not a complete excuse." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." The coffee sat between them, cooling. "Is the letter true?" she said. "The part about coming back because of me?" "Yes, and the part about being afraid and frayed?" "Also yes." She was quiet for a long time. He didn't fill it. "Okay." She picked up the letter, stood, and put her coat back on. At the door she stopped. "Owen," he looked up. "The plug behind the radiator," she said. "I angled it that way because I noticed you had charged your laptop, and it had been in the wrong position for a year." She held his gaze for a moment. "I noticed you before you thought I did." She left. He sat for a while in the quiet of Tremblas, watching the maple trees bend gently outside, and thought that maybe the point wasn't whether someone noticed you first, but whether, when it mattered, you were honest enough to be noticed at all. 1 week later, on a Thursday, he drove to Hartwell without knowing what he would find. The library was open. She was at the reference desk. She looked up when he came through the door. "There's an outlet by the window," she said. "You know where it is." He did. He sat up at his table, angled the plug, opened his laptop. After a few minutes, she set a cup of tea beside him. Earl Grey this time, not chamomile, and returned to the desk without a word. They worked in the same room for 2 hours in a silence that didn't need to be explained. Later, when the afternoon light had shifted and he was packing up to drive back, she came over and straightened a book on the shelf beside him. Not one that needed straightening, just something to do with her hands. "The celebration event for the grant is on the 22nd, she said, to the shelf. "It would be strange if the founder of the funding organization didn't come." "It might raise questions," he said. "I can handle questions," she said. He picked up his bag. "I'll be there." She nodded. Neither of them said anything more than that, because some things, if they've been honest enough, don't need to be elaborated on. They just need to be kept. Outside, the maples were pale green with the effort of spring, and the air smelled like cold earth and possibility, which is what Canadian spring always smells like, right before it actually arrives. He walked to his car and drove north and south and home, and for the first time in 20 years, he was not already thinking about what came next. He was still in the moment he'd just left, which felt, all things considered, like exactly enough.